Thanks, Volodymyr. Greetings, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to Ukraine. So I always say that the presence is very valuable. The presence, physical presence, is one of the most important things because you cannot understand what is happening without physically being present. And I consider myself as a wandering philosopher. So in our philosophical tradition, we have a great Volodymyr, philosopher of the 18th century, the famous baroque Ukrainian philosopher. And we have this metaphor of wandering philosopher, a philosopher who is not sitting in his room reading books, but rather going from village to village. We are going literally from village to village, from town to town very often. As Valery said, at 11 we will start our trip to the south. Tomorrow we'll be in Kherson. Kherson is a city in southern Ukraine which was occupied by the Russians in 2022 for 8 months. And now it's on the bank of the Dnipro River. Russians are like 4 kilometers on the other side. They shell the city very often. It's quite dangerous to live there, but people are living there. So, kind of when we go there, it's a kind of support to people. We will meet military, we will bring books to the military. That's an interesting thing as well. Because usually we bring cars to the military. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, we made more than 40 trips, 40, to the frontline areas. So we go every month, several times per month. We counted that we spent on the front line about 3 months or 4 months if you put all the days together. This is despite the fact that we with my wife have 3 children, so we need to take care of them. And schooling during the wartime is a very interesting thing. Very interesting thing because you need to cope with air alerts, school mining, it's almost every day. So it's a very fun story. Our life is very interesting. It's really unbelievable. So, and we enjoy it very much. It's of course a bit of a sarcasm, but it also says that something is going on which is not going on in places. So I'm going to talk to you about the global meaning of the Ukrainian resistance. And the key word that I will use now is the word re-imperialization. Re-imperialization. What I mean by that is that we are kind of prisoners, we have become prisoners of the idea that democracies will always win. And I really respect famous Francis Fukuyama, he comes here very often, I really respect his books. But, and I do think that his book, End of History, is kind of misinterpreted, misunderstood, but there is this meme of the end of history and the winning by liberal democracies, which is kind of a present, and I believe that we are still kind of the prisoners of this meme. So we still believe that empires and new empires is a kind of a misunderstanding that will sooner or later disappear because democracies will win. I personally think that this is not the case. And for me, like one of the key elements of thinking about is ancient philosophers, from Aristotle to Polybius up to the modern philosophers like Machiavelli, the good part of Machiavelli, who are saying basically that democracies are fragile, that there is something in the world which is called anarchiklosis, the Greek term, which is kind of coming back of the old forms. And democracies are weak sometimes because people in a kind of developed democracies or developed republics, they take freedom for granted, they take the freedom as a commodity, they enjoy it much more than they fight for it, and at a certain moment they become disappointed with kind of abundance of freedom which is available on the market, and they start supporting the tyrants. The tyrants that come and they say, okay, we will sort it out. So it's amazing how the crisis of democracy that is present today, that has been present 100 years ago with fascism and Nazism, going with the same argument as today's far right. This basically was described by ancient philosophers 2,000 years ago. So why the concept of re-imperialization is important? Because we kind of also live in this utopia of decolonization and deimperialization, which is the 20th century. So there are two problems in this idea. Of course, we know kind of this history of the 20th century and 19th and 20th century. Well, big European empires collapsed. Big European empires fell away. First Spain and Portugal, then you have Habsburg Empire, Ottoman Empire, the first German Empire, and all the way down to the maritime empires, to the France and Britain, the Netherlands, and Belgium in the decolonization. And we kind of consider this first. The first mistake is that this process more or less finalized. This is kind of a perception of this. And this perception misunderstands and completely takes out of the vision the Russian Empire. The second thing is that the interpretation of the big events of the 20th century, like the Second World War, is seen very unilaterally. Like, okay, what is the Second World War? Like for the mainstream people in Europe, in Germany, is that okay? It's about the German imperialism, it's about the Nazism, and etc. Well, what is completely missed out of the picture is that it's about also Russian imperialism. So it's basically a collection of two imperialisms. And the third thing is that this is an illusion that decolonization is a natural process. You have the empires, then you have decolonization. Well, there's troubled democracies, but still there are democracies. Let's proceed with them. Let's help them, etc. Well, when you look at history, the kind of it's not a rule, but kind of a trend which repeats in history is that when one empire disappears, there is another empire that takes on. Yeah. And this is what I call re-imperialization. And when we look at the 21st century, it's quite we are kind of on the crossroads. We still can assure that, well, this idea of Fukuyama that liberal democracies will still be on a kind of a expansion. It's still valid, it is still possible, and Ukraine is proving that it is still possible. Well, we kind of see also another gloomy picture that 21st century can be a century of coming back of empires, or the emergence of the new empires. And of course, the first thing you think about is China. So the way how China is now colonizing the world. But Russia is also a possible player in this game. And the history of Russia, it also shows you, because one of the things, like the way how you can look at the history of Russia, there are two things. The first thing is that it constantly reinvents itself as an empire, taking ideas that are popular at the particular time of history. Like when you take the Muscovy of the 16th century, when basically the expansion started, when Ivan the Terrible conquered the Khanate of Kazan and then Khanate of Astrakhan, and when a person called Yermak, not today's Yermak, but the 16th century Yermak, captured Siberia. Well, the thing is that one of the ways to think about it, the Moscow imperialism, is basically that it is taking the heritage of the Golden Horde. It's taking the heritage of the Mongol Empire, which was Muscovy was part of it, and then gradually taking over the remnants of it, up until the 18th century and Catherine II taking over the Crimean Khanate, which is kind of what we call the first annexation of Crimea. So basically, you can think about the Muscovy imperialism and Russian Empire as the way to kind of a re-imperialization of the Golden Horde, re-imperialization of the Mongol Empire, which was one of the most powerful empires in the Middle Ages. I mean, the same you can think about, like, okay, there is a Roman Empire, then it collapses partially, but it continues with Byzantium. Then Byzantium is challenged by other imperialism like Turk Seljuks and then Ottomans, and then Ottomans taking over. You can think about in these terms, and this can show us that
Well, it's not necessary. It's not necessarily true when empires collapse that they kind of split over to good, fine republics, right? It's quite possible that when empires collapse, you have the revenge or of other empires, and I think this is a danger that we need to be aware of. And if we basically we need to project the world, what kind of the world we will have when the 21st century will be a century of re-imperialization and not de-imperialization. So if Russia wins in this war, it is certain that we will have the world of re-imperialization in the 21st century. If Russia wins this war with this idea of Ukraine as a republic or democracy fighting back against empire, we will have this world. And frankly speaking, it's not the world that I want to live in. And this is kind of our discussion with what we call Global South, because many people many prominent speakers from the Global South are asking, okay, but you're fighting against your Russian imperialism, we are fighting against, European imperialism or Northern American imperialism, whatever. What I'm asking them is that, okay, but what ideas do you use? You use ideas of this, democratic republican tradition. Let's think in another way. Let's think that, okay, what you believe to be a Western imperialism, which is fading away, will be replaced by some other imperialisms. Will be replaced by Chinese imperialism. Will be replaced by, new Russian imperialism. Will you be happier about it? And I think we lack this discussion in the global world. And it can be a topic that can actually unite what we call the global north and the global south, how we proceed to real de-imperialization in the 21st century, how we prevent re-imperialization, which is much more typical for history than the victory of republics and empire. The second thing I wanted to say is that there is a kind of a misinterpretation of not misinterpretation, but different interpretations of what happened in the 20th century in Eastern Europe and let's say the Western Europe and Northern America, is that for the Western world, the end of the Second World War was a victory of good against evil, while for us, for Eastern Europeans, it was a victory of one evil against another one. And this is a very important thing that all of us need to understand, that it's not only the victory of one evil, Stalinism and Stalin version of communism against Nazism, it's also the strengthening of the Stalinism and by means of Stalinism of the Russian imperialism. Because basically you can read what happened to Russia after the First World War as a start of de-imperialization. So the peak of the Russian Empire is the 19th century. The peak of the European presence of the Russian Empire is the 19th century. Russia was, having power over Poland, over Finland. The Ukrainian question was very tiny presented. The key question was the Polish question, the Polish uprisings in the 19th century. So you can read Russia's defeat in the First World War, and it was Russia's defeat in the First World War, as a start of this de-imperialization of Russia. Kind of a Soviet Union, which was a kind of a tricky compromise that Stalin tried to overcome with his huge repressions and with Holodomor, with many other issues in 1930. But basically the result of the Second World War is that the Russian imperialism is back. So it became stronger. And for us, what the West considers as the final thing, we won against the absolute evil, which is Nazism. We kind of think and repent the greatest crime, which is the Holocaust. For the Eastern Europeans, it's all valid, of course. Nazism and the Holocaust is a huge tragedy for us, and you can go to Babyn Yar and see one of the most horrible Holocaust crimes here. But for us, it's also kind of a missing another part of the story, is that for us, frankly speaking, for Russian Second World War is not over, but for us as well. the Second World War is not over. If you think it in terms of, really the moral question, well, how you fight against what can be called kind of a totalitarian evil. I know that the concept of evil is very problematic. Many people criticize me for that, but I insist that it is important. Another thing which is very important is that the nature of the Russian imperialism is very often misunderstood. Because again, we look at it from the lens of the maritime Western imperialism. And why we look at it? Because in the First World War, the maritime empires have basically won. This is the theme of Tim Snyder, a very interesting argument that in the First World War, basically maritime empires like Britain and France have won, while land empires, Germany, Austro-Hungary, Ottoman Empire and Russian Empire have lost. And I think that created this thing that the first what people forgot is that there is this logic of land imperialism, which is kind of a different from the logic of sea imperialism of maritime empires. And the second thing is that you can read the Second World War as also an attempt of imperial revenge, both from the German side and from the Russian side. And just as the Germans lost, we tend, as I said, we tend to look at the Second World War only through the lens of the German Nazi imperialism and not through the lens of the Russian imperialism. Which was, by the way, okay, but this is a difference. So what is the difference between sea empires and land empires? I will now describe the ideas, and then I will say that of course we'll never have them in their purity, though there are always hybrids, okay? The difference is that in maritime empires you colonize the distant people, and the colonizer says to the colonized, you are distant from me, you are different from me, and this difference cannot be overcome. So you will always be different from me. Especially it comes in the late 19th century with the rise of the European racist theories, mostly in France and Britain, then go over to Germany and other places because of the Africa. Because in the colonization of Africa, this is the most typical thing. I mean, this is the racism, you have a different skin than me, you will always be different than me, you will never become myself, right? So the difference and hierarchical difference is the major tool of domination. I have a right to dominate you because I'm different from you and I'm higher than you. This is the logic of racist maritime imperialism. While the logic of land imperialism, I'm taking the Ukraine-Russia example, is different. So the logic of land imperialism is that I colonize close people, close nations. You look like me, you speak the language which is not far away from my own. We have common history, so you are the same than me. The colonizer says to the colonized, you are the same than me. You will never become different than me. So the tool of domination is not the idea of difference, but the idea of sameness. And this is very important when we look about Russia and Ukraine. I told you that there are hybrids, of course. The British imperialism with regard to America in the late 18th century is probably one of these hybrids. So it's a maritime imperialism, but maybe with the logic of this sameness. You know better than me. But take Nazism, for example. What Nazism was doing, what Hitler was doing, he was saying, okay, the Jews, you're distant than me because you are Semitic, you come from Asia, we fight against you, but you try to go closer. You try to be the same as us. You speak our language, you look like us, you became assimilated, etc. So the task of the Nazis is to alienate the Jews back, so to reimpose this distance. And first there was an idea to replace them and to bring them somewhere to Madagascar or somewhere else. And then there was the final solution and everything. So the logic of Russians towards Ukrainians is different. Because the logic is not like Jews, you are distant than us, you're different, but you're trying to get close. No, with Ukrainians, Russians and the Ukrainians, the logic is like different, because the idea is you are the same than us, but you're trying to be distant, you know, you're trying to be different, and will not let you be different, okay? So this is much more of the logic of race, much more of the logic of assimilation than racism. And this is, I think this point is kind of a misunderstood. 10 minutes, okay? I will finish on that, and probably I will get questions. This logic is kind of a misunderstood because Russia is perceived as a nation. Well, it's not a nation, it's an empire which colonizes other people, other nations. Of course, if you take, for example, Russian attitude to the Central Asia, to the Caucasus, to, I don't know, to Buryats, to Tuvins, or whatever else, you have the mixture of this. So you can have a land empire which uses the same logic of difference and distance. But I just give you these types for you to understand that sometimes that imperialisms are similar, but sometimes they are different. And this we need to understand this difference in order to proceed. So I will finish on that. I will just come back to my first point. One of the ways to read Russian history is the way how I define empire. Empire is something that have a single center but doesn't have borders. This is a big difference towards the idea of the republic. I use the republic not in your American context. So I use the republic and democracy as mostly synonyms, but with some differences. I don't want to go into that. But the idea of republic, res publica, which is a Latin translation of the Greek term politeia, is the idea that you have borders, but you have multiple centers. So you have a competition between different centers. So empire, one center, no borders, expansion. Republic, you have borders more or less clear-cut, but not a single center. And if you look at the Russian history, the problem of the Russian history, their kind of a legacy, is that, well, they set up their state, and their state is not based in Kiev with St. Volodymyr, etc. Their state is basically the point where they overturned the Mongol power and became the key player in the post-Mongol empire, and that's basically 15th and early 16th century. So the point when they started their state, they started immediately to expand, and expanded very quickly, and reached Pacific Ocean and the borders of China in mid-17th century. So the point when here you have the Bogdan Khmelnytsky monument here, the uprising against the Rzeczpospolita and basically turning to Muscovy, the point when you have Ukraine kind of choosing the wrong alliance with the Muscovy Tsar, which played a very bad thing in our history. This point, Muscovites were already on the Pacific Ocean. So the expansion, and that creates this idea, which is very present in the Russian mind, that we don't have borders, we don't have political borders. The idea of the Russian world, the idea of the Eurasianists, so the dominant ideology in Russia today, the idea of the Russian world as going beyond the borders, the idea that Russia is the state civilization, as they say in their official documents, says that basically political borders don't matter. And therefore you can invade other countries because they speak Russian or whatever else. But their fear is that they can't imagine the empire with fixed borders, because they basically don't have a nation state to come back to, contrary to some other European nations. And the fear that they have, that if they're not expanding, they will be shrinking. So if they will not expand their territory, they will lose the territory. And the idea behind them is, okay, we have the Chechen Wars. The Chechen Wars was a kind of an attempt to create wars in our territory. We massacred the Chechens, and then we need to go outside, as Surkov said, to bring the chaos outside, otherwise we'll have the war on our territory. So this is the logic, and you need to understand, and I talk a lot about the Russian logic, because we need to understand, and we need to understand the logic of the enemy. But my last point is, I really want you to take this with you, that the 21st century can be a century of re-imperialization and not de-imperialization. And the Ukrainian fight is the key story in that, because if Ukraine loses, that means that we will enter the world of re-imperialization, we'll enter the world of new territorial conflicts, we'll enter the world when borders don't matter, because if you have empires, for empires, borders don't matter. Empires don't have borders, they always expand. And this is going to be bad for everybody. This is going to be bad for Europe, basically, because all this European dream, when we have a welfare state, you don't care about the military, it will be gone. Europe will need to reinvent its military capacity, otherwise it will be just gone. And it is also important for America, because America, with these ideas of international order and democracy, it's definitely the situation that will affect everybody. So we can have a world where the military spending will go high, and what we are thinking about as a kind of social policy, health policy, welfare policies will go down. And Ukrainians don't want this world. I hope nobody wants this world, not only in the northern world, but also in the southern world. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have time, I can answer questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. Very interesting insights. I want to ask you to explore one additional direction. So, one of the themes of the New Thinking School and the intellectual tradition that it's a part of is to look at both what's happening externally in terms of history as causes, and then also what's happening internally in terms of psychology. You mentioned you introduced this concept of re-imperialization, this kind of reassertion of the empire, kind of expanding the borders of the empire. And the threat, or the concern about that happening as part of showing Russia, the actions of Russia. One of the things that's also been uncovered in kind of psychology and in group psychology and in cultural psychology is also different cultures will accept that there are power differences. Some cultures don't like power differences, very egalitarian. Some cultures, they assume yes, there will always be some people who have more power and some people with less power. How much do you see that as part of the sort of cultural character showing up in this re-imperialization as like a cause for why it makes sense, like you're saying with the land-based empires, to say, oh, we will always have more power, so we should always dominate our neighbors?
That's a very good question, thank you, and thank you for bringing it. I actually stress all the time that one of the ways to look at this war is psychology, and I even suggested the term geopsychology. Because I do think that with the famous question, do states think? I do think that the states think, and the states feel, the states have fears, the states have traumas, so the states have subconscious. So you can actually think about these terms, and I'm writing a lot about it. We're thinking a lot of so that can be a very long question, very long answer to which I don't have time. We don't have time right now. So I do think that one of the psychological elements of the current Russian actions is that what I call the negative sum game, is that, in the Western world, people are kind of accustomed to the fact that either you have positive sum game or you have zero sum game. So positive sum game, that in the transaction everybody wins. In the zero sum game, I win, you lose. But in the current Russian geopsychopolitics, psychopolitics is interesting. Psychopolitics, that's a new term. In this psychopolitics, the aim of the game is to lose less than you. Not to win more than you, but to lose less than you. Therefore, I think it also was absolutely miscalculated by the expert community in the West, when people saying, okay, but not only in the West, but also in Ukraine, I think. People were saying, okay, but Russia will attack, then it will suffer, it will lose people, it will lose money, it will stop. And this idea is that this cost-benefit analysis, which doesn't apply to Russia, because in Russian psychopolitics and geopsychology, the aim is, okay, I will lose blood, but you will lose more blood. That's the game. I will suffer, of course, but you will suffer more. And that's the thing we need to take into consideration. Another psychological thing is the question of risks. So the Russian ideology is very much based, like if you read people like Dugin, etc., it's very much based on people like Carl Schmitt, one of the Nazi philosophers, who are saying that who is the sovereign? The sovereign is somebody who increases risks for himself and for the others. So the Western world, especially Europe, is based upon the idea that the goal is to decrease risks. Russia is based upon the idea the goal is to increase risks. And when you are in this situation, how do you increase risks? You create the unpredictable situation. You do something that nobody expects you to do. Like nobody expects you to attack Russia, Ukraine, we will attack Ukraine. One of the ways to react on that is to increase risk for Russia. And I think this is something that the West is not ready psychologically primarily. Well, we can discuss whether, there can be, of course, bad things, consequences, but I don't see how otherwise we can stop Russia without increasing risk for it. And the Ukrainian Kursk operation can be seen as a kind of this playing the psychological game with Russians. Okay, you create unpredictable environment. What is creating unpredictable environment? Is that you create the reality to which everybody else should adapt to. And basically, therefore, you always have the initiative and you always have power over time. This is a very important power, having power over time. So basically, what Ukrainians are trying to do, let's create the unpredictable for you. So there are lots of things, and what you mentioned is one of the ways to read Ukrainian history is to say this is a very egalitarian society in which there is a huge mistrust of power. Therefore, you can never have here the internal domestic authoritarianism because people don't like it. You can have this external authoritarianism, you can have this exported authoritarianism, but not internal authoritarianism. And this is also the war of political cultures, because the political culture in Russia since the Mongol times, this is, I can go on this, is not only the idea that you have the hierarchy between the Tsar and all the rest, but the idea that between the Tsar and all the rest there is nobody. There is no aristocracy that have rights. There is no even oligarchs that have rights and then can challenge the Tsar. So it's another type, it's of course not egalitarian, but it's another type of hierarchy as well. We need to understand it. Sorry for being too long.
Thank you so much.